Do the early recruiting rankings really matter and why? Today we're going to explain that on The Portal.
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into The Portal. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making The Portal your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk about all the things going on in the world of recruiting, NIL, and the transfer portal, as roster management has never been more important in college football. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com. All right, today's show is a rather fun one because I enjoy talking about roster management in many ways. But a question I get from parents, from recruits, from people that are young, that are at least thinking they're going to be recruited, what do the recruiting rankings mean for them individually, teams, etc. I'm going to focus a little more on the team aspect, but the individuals will come into play here in just a moment. Number one, if your team is not ranked very high, whatever school you root for, in the recruiting rankings, don't worry about it. Here's an example for you. I was just looking at the rivals.com recruiting rankings for the teams. Right now, Alabama is 35th. They've got a few commitments. They're really good players, but they only have 3. No big deal. It's a big part of their process to get to the end line, though. They're not concerned about having 3 right now. Alabama staff knows what they're doing in terms of not just taking guys that take them. They're recruiting big-time players, and many of them are going to make decisions this summer, this fall, and then eventually some right around National Signing Day, the first week of December. It is a marathon, not a sprint. With that being stated, here's a prime example. Again, Alabama's 35th by rivals. The team right in front of them, Sacramento State. They've got 8 commitments. Do you really think Sacramento State, no offense to them, will finish anywhere in the top 50? No, they will not. But at the same time, they're doing their due diligence and they recruit in a totally different manner. So let's just get that out of the way. From a numbers perspective, it matters because totality of recruiting is just volume. You have to have so many kids to get to a certain point higher in the rankings by most systems. On threes is a little different, etc., but volume matters. Now into the really important stuff. What you should really be looking at, okay, who do we have committed? And again, whatever school you root for, that's your business. Texas, Illinois, Memphis, I don't care who it is. Who are you in on? Who do you have official visits with? Would be great if you got a bunch. But if not, even more importantly, which kids, as we come out of the dead period here in a few days in February and going into March, which kids are lined up for unofficial visits? That is really more important than the recruiting rankings because they're all about to change dramatically. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. We can use Alabama again, and I'll use Oregon as well. Oregon has the number 2 class. It's an incredibly good job by Dan Lanning and his staff. They have prioritized underclassmen recruiting, as many schools do, and do a good job. And they've gotten some commitments a little earlier than normal. It doesn't mean that it's rock solid and it's guaranteed that these kids are going to sign, but at least they're doing their due diligence. But they're a national recruiting team because their in-state base is not the same as, say, Texas, as Florida State, as Alabama. Some of these schools have an easier base to get like 5 to 7 kids a year that are really, really good, that are coveted nationally. Oregon does not have that. So they go about it in a different way. And hats off to Dan Lanning and his staff. They might have the best overall recruiting operation in the country. You could certainly make that argument. But who do you have coming in for unofficial visits? That's more important than the recruiting rankings, but it will tie into them in about a month or so. We get to late March, there's going to be a whole bunch of commitments, kids taking unofficial visits for these junior days all across the country. Again, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Miami, whatever school it is, they're all going to have junior days. And that's where it's important. If you go to whatever site that you follow and look at a list and you're like, man, I don't think we're doing that good, like some of the key guys that are local, that's more important than who's committed right now. Because even if you had commitments, you want them on the list too, because you want them there helping you recruit. That's very important. And you also need to have a scenario where you have these young men coming in consistently. You're not going to hold a top class unless they're taking unofficial visits. Now, again, that's why Oregon's class is so unique. A lot of their kids that they get committed, they're not from very close. California, but that's still a lot of those kids. LA, it's a long drive. So most of the kids fly, even from LA to Eugene. That being the case, they got kids from all over the country they're going to have for junior days. Tremendous job. What does your school have for this next, say, 3-4 weeks coming up in March? If they don't have multiple kids coming in that are elite, that's something to think about, especially your local kids. A school like Michigan or Penn State, did they have their local kids coming in? In-state in Michigan State's trying to rise back up, but Michigan should dominate that state for the most part. I mean, it's Michigan. That's just another example. And here's the other big one. With these unofficial visits, right after, how many of these kids set up OVs? You can look at the rankings now and take a picture, like literally, and save it for later or write it down. Look at what the rankings are now, and then every month, early in the month, look at how it changes. Those visits are going to drastically change everything with the rankings because you're going to have a lot of commitments and OVs, sometimes both, with those unofficial visits. March is about the kids actually getting on campus, but it's the work that's been done right now. Again, this is a dead period here in February to set up everything. If you didn't do your due diligence, you're going to get your butt kicked in March. And a lot of guys are going to have to answer some awkward questions in back office meetings at their institutions that they work for. And some of them are making 7 figures. Some are even making more than that. So you need to look at it from a broad perspective. Don't worry about how many guys are committed right now. It's more about the visits. That is the key to team recruiting rankings long term. We know that in the recruiting industry. We joke about it all the time. Well, so-and-so, again, like Bama's got 3 commitments. They're going to be fine. They've changed their strategy a little bit too. That's another topic, but it's Alabama. They're going to finish somewhere in the top 10, barring them just taking very few kids in any given year. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. Next, we're going to be talking about a kid that Bama and a bunch of schools are after that is going to be making a decision on Friday. I saw him recently. His name's McWhorter's. He's out of Georgia. That is next here on The Portal. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Here's an example. You can use FanDuel's live betting feature to keep every moment of the game going. You don't have to just bet before the game. You can do it right in the middle of the game with live betting. And you can also have an opportunity to look at it from a perspective of any part of the game, first quarter, fourth quarter, whatever, when the rally's coming on, do they get over the top? Some team that was down 10 with 8 minutes to go, you can bet on that too. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. McWhorter is a very good offensive lineman out of Cass High School in Georgia. Really good football player that, quite honestly, just solidifies the statement power player. He's going to be an interior offensive lineman, and Bear is not just a good road grader. He's one of those guys you're like, okay, he's a little different. I saw him at the Under Armour camp, and he got offensive line MVP at the Under Armour camp in Atlanta, but there were a handful of really good players that he was going up against. He didn't just show up and just run over people. I mean, the Atlanta camp's got good defensive linemen every year. This was no exception, and he's 6'3", 300-plus pounds, probably going to be a guard. It offers from around the country. Finalists, Michigan, South Carolina, Alabama, Clemson, Florida. It's an interesting race, and you're probably like, Brian, why are you talking about interior offensive linemen? Well, let me ask you this. When you looked at the final 4 teams in the college football playoff, and I brought this up a few times here on the show, how many times did those teams rely on their offensive line to get them back into a groove, to get the momentum back? Those teams recruited at an elite level out of the high school level for O-line. Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. There were very few transfers on any of those schools, and some none. they're all high school kids. That's because they don't have to. If you get the elite O-lineman, and to a certain extent, same thing with D-line, and you develop them through your system, it's plug and play. It's not easy to teach line play. There's a lot of nuances to it, but you need to have them. Getting a guy like Barry McWhorter, let's say it's South Carolina that wins the recruitment, that changes how you're perceived, going back to recruiting rankings, and it also changes the future of what you have to do with NIL money. It changes your perspective on your program because they're so coveted. I spoke to somebody yesterday that is very heavy in the NIL game, helping some different people with financial stuff, and he was telling me the coaches that he speaks with all over the South and the North, et cetera, when they're talking just about prospects, the number one thing it's brought up, we need more linemen. That's why a guy like Barry McWhorter is so important. Again, he's not just any normal guy. He's a really good interior offensive lineman, somebody that can help him play in year 2 and at the latest year 3, be a multi-year starter. He has that kind of physical capability. If you do not have the ability to maul the team in front of you, the elite teams, at least part of the time, you're not going to win a national title. You're not going to sniff winning a national title. You must be able to get elite players in the trenches every single year from the high school ranks. Again, Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Go look at their recruiting on the offensive line over the last 5 years. Do your own research on it, and you can use other schools to that point. There's a reason they were successful. Georgia didn't quite do as well as they normally do, and they got beat by Notre Dame. Their offensive line recruiting didn't bear out. If you miss, you will pay the price on the field. So that is today's prediction. If you can't win the recruiting battles in the trenches, it's just all over, my friend. You will get your butt beat. And more often than not, it's obvious early in a game too. So with that, thank you once again for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Going to have John Garcia Jr. on with me here in just a little bit. We're going to be talking about recruiting rankings, camps, some of the things coming up, and some other recruiting news around the world. Make sure you stop in to see that later today. It's going to be out around 4 o'clock. So everybody have a good one. I will see you again soon here on the Portal.